The first word we're going to talk about is plot. When we say plot, what is it? Plot is the events that make up a story. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, let's use one of the read aloud books we've done. So I know right now we're kind of in the middle of Coraline, but we finished The Watsons Go to Birmingham. Now, throughout the book, a lot of different things happen, right? Those different events are what make up the plot. So in the beginning, we had Kenny and Byron, and they were cleaning off the car. They were supposed to be taking off the ice, and Byron got his lip stuck, and they had to pull him off, and he tore his lips. And then afterwards, we see how Byron was messing around at the house, and he was doing things that his mom and dad had asked him not to do, even though they'd asked him more than once. We had the part where Byron kills the bird by accident. He feels really bad about it. We had the part where the school bully steals Kenny's gloves, and Byron beats him up so that Kenny can get the gloves back. We have the part about playing with the dinosaurs. And we have their long car trip. We have when they went down to the creek and Kenny got sucked in by the whirlpool. We have the part about the church and how Joetta walked out of the church because she thought she saw Kenny. And then we have the part when they get back home. So that is the plot. The series of events, the chain of events that make up the story. The setting is the next word we're going to talk about. The setting is the time and the place that the story is taking place. Okay? So setting has two parts to it. Time and place. When I say time, I don't mean that you have to be super specific. You don't have to tell me it was 7:30 a.m. or it was 2:45 p.m. You could just tell me that it was morning or daytime. You could tell me it was lunchtime, it was afternoon, or it was nighttime. And then the place would be, where is it happening? If we talk about the part of the story where, let's say the part where Byron beats up the school bully to get back Kenny's gloves. We know that everyone was at the playground, so it wasn't nighttime. It probably was either afternoon, maybe lunchtime, but we could just say daytime. So it was daytime, and where were they? They were at the playground. That's where everybody was. If they're asking about the part where Kenny's playing with his toy dinosaurs with his friend, say, okay, well, again, happens during the daytime. But now the setting is daytime at Kenny's house, not at the playground anymore. So for setting, you always need to remember those two parts, time and place. And remember, time can be very general. You just say daytime or nighttime. You don't have to be specific and tell me it was exactly 8:30 or it was exactly 10:15. Just tell me daytime, nighttime, or if you can be a little more specific or say lunchtime or something like that, or morning, that would be fine too. It's okay. Okay. Complications. Complications is just another word for problems. Normally in a story, the main character of your story is trying to do something. They want something to happen. Complications are the problems that make whatever they want to do more difficult. So let's keep using the gloves for an example. Kenny had 2 pairs of gloves. He gave 1 pair to Rufus, so that way they could both play and make snowballs, right? So that way his hands are warm and Rufus's hands are warm. Everything was fine. They both had a pair of gloves. They could both play and they could both make snowballs. What was the problem that happened after that? What made it hard for both of them to have a pair of gloves? Jadine?
Because each of them only had one pair, and the other hand was not covered.
Well, not at first. So after a little bit, Kenny gave one pair of the gloves to his friend, and then he took the other one. So they both had both hands covered. But why did they have to go back to sharing the gloves? Noah, do you remember?
Oh, Kenny's glove disappeared.
It disappeared. So they both had a pair of gloves, so both of their hands would be protected and warm, and then one of the pairs disappeared. So they had to go back to sharing. And what was it that, how did it disappear? Did the gloves get up and walk off, or what happened? Kylie? It was stolen by the school bully. And so at first Kenny and his friend were just gonna keep sharing, but he really wanted to have a set of gloves so his hands could be nice and comfortable. How did they get the gloves back? Brianna? How did Kenny and Rufus get the gloves back after they were stolen? The bully had them, and how'd they get them back from the bully? Because they didn't just walk up and say, hey, can I have the gloves back? Kenny's brother. Kenny's brother went to the bully and he beat him up, right? And after he beat up the bully, that's when they got the gloves back. So we had some complications there. Like Jadine said at the beginning, Kenny was sharing a pair of gloves. So he had one and Rufus had one. Then Kenny had the idea, wait a second, I'm going to give Rufus my first pair of gloves, and then I'm going to get the second pair, and then we both have both of our hands covered. Then a pair of the gloves gets stolen. They find out who has them, and then Kenny's brother beats up the bully to get the gloves back. So complications are all those little problems that they keep running into. So the first problem was that there wasn't enough gloves for Kenny and his friend. Then the problem was that the second pair of gloves went missing. Then they found out who had them, but he wasn't going to give them back if they just walked up and said, hey, can I have my gloves, please? So then Kenny's brother went and beat up the bully to get the gloves back. Speaking of Kenny, protagonist. The protagonist is another word for the main character in the story. So like in The Watsons Go to Birmingham, Kenny is the protagonist. He is the main character of that story. Sometimes there is more than one protagonist, more than one main character. It might be a group of people. But even when there's a group of people, there's usually one person that the story focuses on a little more than others. If you think of something like Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a good example because they do have a group of people that the story talks a lot about. It's 3 different people that the story really focuses on. But out of those 3 people, there's still one person that the story talks about more than the others. His name's even in the title of the book, Harry Potter. The same thing is kind of true with The Watsons Go to Birmingham. Kenny is our protagonist, and even though the book does spend a lot of time talking about Byron, most of the story is focused on Kenny. Even the times where they talk about Byron a lot, it's usually because Kenny is with him. Like when Kenny is walking to the store with him, or when Kenny sees him when he accidentally hits the bird with the cookie. or when they're taking the road trip together and Kenny is sitting next to him. Now the antagonist is whoever is going against the protagonist. Whoever is going against your main character is the antagonist. So a way that you could think about it is like whoever's getting in their way. A lot of times people like to break it up into who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. Good guy is the protagonist, bad guy is the antagonist. So in something like Harry Potter is the protagonist. And then we have the evil wizard Voldemort. He is the antagonist. He's the guy that Harry Potter is always fighting against. In the Watsons Go to Birmingham, we know that Kenny is the protagonist. And we have the school bully. He can be an antagonist. And later on, Kenny starts talking about the wool poo. And that becomes an antagonist because Kenny's fighting against him. First at the creek, and then later on, he talks about the wool poo at the church. If we look at something like the first book that we read this year, the 4th grade Rats book, you have Suds, who's our protagonist, our main character, and then you have the school bully, who's his antagonist, and also kind of his friend, because we said his friend was being a pretty big bully through most of that book, telling him that he needed to stop liking the things he liked, he needed to change his lunchbox, and to start doing all this other stuff and messing up his room and doing things like that. So we need to keep track of these words because we're going to use them while we're talking about plot. Remember, plot is the events in the story, what happens first, second, third, fourth, the beginning, the middle, and the end. The setting is the time and the place that the story happens. Is that what we're working on right now, Ezekiel? I know, but is that what we're working on right now? I want you to focus on what we're working on right now, okay? Okay. So the setting is the time and the place where the story is happening. The complications are all the little problems that happen throughout the story. The protagonist is our main character. That's okay, Messiah. And the antagonist is whoever is always fighting against that protagonist, against our main character. Now we need to know those words because we're going to be talking about plot. And I want you to notice on this page it says plot pyramid. There's a couple of ways people think about it. Some people say plot pyramid because it kind of does look like a pyramid. It's got that triangular shape to it. Sometimes people call it a plot mountain. They say it kind of looks like the mountain. Some people call it a roller coaster because it kind of looks like the part of the roller coaster where it goes up, 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 gets to the top, and then you go down. Okay? So plot has 5 parts to it. I want you to look really closely at these arrows. The arrows kind of show you how the plot works. Here's where you start. This is like the beginning of the story, the beginning of the book. We call that the exposition. Sometimes people will call that the introduction. The exposition is the beginning of your book, the beginning of your story. Now this next part kind of messes a few people up. So it goes, you see how it starts out flat and then it starts to go up toward the top. This part of the book where it goes up is called the rising action. Rising because it goes up. The rising action is most of the book. When I say most of the book, I really, really mean it. Even though everything looks pretty even on this page, it all looks like they're equal parts, that they're even parts of the book, they're not. The rising action is most of your book. The rising action is where all the little problems happen. And you go from one little problem to another, to another, to another. And the reason why you have all those little problems is because without the little problems in the story, well, the story would be really short and it'd be really boring. I'll give you the example of Harry Potter again. There are, what, 7 Harry Potter books, right? So it takes Harry Potter 7 books to finally beat Voldemort. There's a lot of little problems that happen throughout all the different books. Different places that Voldemort is hiding out at, different people that are working with him or for him, that are doing all sorts of things. All sorts of little problems. Now I want you to imagine what would have happened in the book if, I don't know, Voldemort just walked up to Harry Potter and then said, "You know what? I give up." It'd be a very short story. It also wouldn't be very interesting. It'd be about 2 pages long. Nothing would really happen, and it wouldn't feel so exciting when Harry Potter wins. The reason why most of the book is part of the rising action is because without all of those little problems, when they win, it's not exciting. It's not impressive. I want you to imagine playing a game like, let's say, basketball or soccer or football. Now I want you to imagine that you played against someone who's really good. Someone who's really good at basketball or really good at soccer or really good at football. So if you play against someone really good and you win, that's a good feeling. You know that, yeah, I did it. I tried really hard. I beat this person. That's awesome. It feels great to win that way. Now, I want you to imagine that you're playing football or soccer or basketball. And I want you to imagine that you're playing against a baby. Would you feel as good about winning against a baby? No. It would feel really good if you played basketball against your friend and they're really good at basketball and you won. It would feel awesome. It wouldn't be very impressive if you played basketball against a baby and you're running around dribbling the ball and the baby's just crawling after you and you keep making basket after basket after basket. Why doesn't that feel as good? It's not fair. You don't have to work for it, do you? You don't have to worry about the baby taking the ball away from you. You don't have to worry about the baby, shooting 3-pointers. The baby couldn't even lift up the ball. So when you win, you kind of go, I guess. Bella, make sure we're staying focused. The baby does not give you any kind of challenge. So it doesn't feel good when you win. That's why the rising action is so much of the story. Because without all those little problems, without all the little things that make it harder, it doesn't feel as good when you get to the end. When that person finally wins, that protagonist finally beats the antagonist, it doesn't feel as good if it wasn't hard at all. Yeah, so if you're playing a game and you're level 20 and someone you're playing against is a level 1 person, you wouldn't feel good about beating them. You'd go, well, yeah, level 20, you're level 1. It's not that hard. If you beat someone who was like a higher level than you, if they were like level 25, you'd feel awesome. So you need those problems to make the story exciting, to make it feel awesome when you get to that part where they win. Because otherwise, it's nothing. There's not really a big celebration. The climax. The climax is like the really big, exciting part of the story. If it's an action book or an action movie or an action story, the climax is usually the part where there's a big fight. So really quickly, raise your hand if you've seen Star Wars. Okay, good. Now there's a lot of Star Wars movies. Okay, the one I'm talking about is the very, very first one. Old Star Wars. Okay? In the old Star Wars, that's when they find Luke Skywalker and he finds out that he's a Jedi and he starts training and then he goes into a ship and he's flying around. And near the end of the movie, they blow up the Death Star. That's almost the end of the movie, but that is the climax of that movie. That's the big, exciting part where he figures out he can do this. If we're talking about Fourth Grade Rats, one of the first books we read this year, the climax of the book, the big, exciting part where everything starts to change, is the part where Suds goes up in the tree to get the cat for Judy Billings. If you remember, that's almost the end of the book. But he goes up into the tree because he thinks, I'm a rat now. I'm not scared of anything. I can do whatever I want. And then Judy Billings is hanging out with me and everyone thinks I'm cool. And he goes up in the tree and he gets the cat and then he looks down and he goes, I am scared and I can't move and I can't get out of the tree and I can't get the cat out of the tree and I need help. Please help me. Help. That's when everything changes. The climax is that exciting part of the story where something finally changes. The falling action is pretty short. The falling action is the part of the story where they start to fix all the little problems that have been going on. So all the problems that are showing up during the rising action, they get fixed here in the falling action. If we think about the Watsons go to Birmingham. In the exposition, we meet Kenny and his family. Oh, yes, Messiah.
What if the movie's like,
that's a good question. So, there are some movies and even books that kind of have like a to be continued part. There's like a second part of it. Normally, even in those movies that are like to be continued or second part, there is still a complete plot. So I want you to think of like the movie Avengers, right? The last Avengers movie. It was part 1 and part 2, right? There was Infinity War and Endgame. Even if you just watch Infinity War, you know that the story is not over. But there's still a plot to that movie. You still get to a climax, to some falling action, to some resolution. Now, if you look at both movies together, you get kind of like a bigger plot. So you can kind of put them together and get an even longer or an even bigger plot. The same thing happens with Harry Potter or with Star Wars, where there's more than one movie and more than one book to go along with it. You can talk about the whole story from book number 1 to book number 7, or from movie number 1 to movie number 9. And you can get a longer plot, a bigger plot. But even if you just look at one movie or one book by itself, you can still look at the plot. There's still going to be one part in there that has the climax where there's a big exciting part that starts to change things. So even in a part 2, there is still a plot, even in just one part of it. But that's a really good question. Noah.
like movie.
So a plot twist is when there's a big change. Something happens and you're like, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen. But sometimes what happens is here in the falling action and the resolution, not every problem gets fixed. And that's what leaves you wanting that part 2. So if we talk about Avengers, at the end of that first one, the end of Infinity War, they have a big fight, right? Big, super huge, exciting fight. And it finally looks like they're going to win, right? You get to the climax and you think everything's going to be fine, and it's not. And you see all the different things that happen because of that. And they don't win. The bad guy gets away. And so they solve some of the problems. They found out where all the Infinity Stones were. And they tried to keep them away, but not all the problems got solved. So that's what makes you want to watch that second part, because you know there's still some problems that didn't get solved. So I need to know what happens next. The same thing happens in Harry Potter. Harry Potter, with the end of book 1, he doesn't beat Voldemort. He's still out there. So you wonder, well, they solved some of the problems, but not all of them. So what's going to happen now? And there's still some problems going on. Or same thing with Star Wars. They beat some of the bad guys in every movie, but they don't beat all of them. And so you think, well, what's going to happen with the rest of the bad guys? What's going to happen with them? What are they going to do? Kylie. I have. Yep. Exactly. So even though that movie had a plot, it had a really cool fight at the end there, and it seems like all the problems were getting solved, right? They beat the bad guy, they were fixing everything, and at the end, you're right. Everything looks good. Everyone's like, hey, Spider-Man, that's cool. And then you see the big TV screen, and they say, no, Spider-Man's a bad guy. Look at what this video shows. And so even though that story's finished, you're already thinking, well, what's going to happen now? Everyone thinks he's a bad guy, but he's really a good guy. And even though we know what happened and we know that that's not the truth, the other people, the characters in that movie, think something else. And that's sometimes how they make a part 2 or a second part of the story, is they'll show us one thing, but not all the characters get to see it. Like sometimes you see the bad guy like sneaking away, but not everyone sees them sneaking away. But we know that the bad guy got out, but the other ones don't. So we know that there's still something else that could happen. Kaylee? Mm-hmm. Okay, Christopher. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think probably one of the plot twists I always think about is like, well, there's a couple of them, but I like Disney movies. So some of them that I think about are like the one that you see in Tangled has a good plot twist, and Frozen has a good plot twist. So like in Tangled, she thinks that her mom is really nice and that her mom is like taking care of her, and then she finds out later on that it's not really her mom, and that she was just like hiding her. She was kidnapping her for her hair because it was magic hair. Or like in Frozen, that you think at first that the one guy is really nice, and then it turns out later on in the movie that he's not nice, that he's actually evil. Yeah, Yeah, exactly, Messiah. So those are great examples of plot twists. But you're right, Brianna. We're gonna go ahead and work on our plot diagram. Okay. So what I want you to do is we're gonna go to classwork. We're gonna go to reading, and you're gonna find this assignment. This plot, vocabulary. We're gonna open that up. Okay, Jada. See you tomorrow. But we're gonna open this up because I know Jada has to go for the bus. But we're gonna open up our plot diagram, and we're gonna fill in these different parts of our plot. Okay? When I open up the plot diagram, it's gonna look like this. So very, very similar to the one I saw in my notebook. Okay? The first thing I'm gonna do is I noticed that they gave each part of the plot a different color, which is really nice. Helps me keep everything organized. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label all the parts of my plot. This first part, the yellow part, that is our exposition. The second part, the pink part, is the rising action. Yes, Noah? So the plot, remember, is all the events in the story. So everything that happens in the story, that's part of the plot. Any story. The only things that don't have plot are something that is like nonfiction. So nonfiction is anything that was true. So if you read a book about somebody's life, like let's say somebody famous, if you read a book about their life, let's say let's say like LeBron James, okay? If you read a book about LeBron James's life and they tell you about when he was a little kid and when he was going to school and then he was in high school and then he started playing basketball or college and they tell you all about his life, there's no plot because that is all true. But anything that's a made up story, whether it's a book, a movie, whatever, if it's a made up story, there's a plot. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So like Harry Potter, Star Wars, the books that we've been talking about, Fourth Grade Rats, Watson's Go to Birmingham, the book we're reading right now, Coraline, all of that has a plot. There's a series of events that happen in the story. No, not topic. So we have the exposition. We have the rising action. On the top is climax. The brown box is our falling action. And you can tell by what part of the plot diagram it's on. The rising action is when it's going up. Falling action is when it's going down. We're doing this together, JD. Chase, did you have a question? No, Chase? Okay. And the last part is called resolution. Okay? Now, if you notice, each part of our plot has small boxes and the big boxes. The small boxes are just for the names. The big boxes are so we can write down what do those parts mean or what happens in those parts. I'm going to go in order, the same way it would go if we were reading the book or watching the movie. For real.
The green one.
Oh, sorry. So we have the exposition first, then the rising action, then the climax, then the falling action, and then the resolution. No matter what book or movie you're watching or reading, the plot will always go in that order: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Always in that same order. Yes, Alexa. Right now, we're just filling out the different parts. We are going to do later on in the week, we are going to fill one out using different stories. But for today, we're just writing down what these different parts are. So it's okay. So exposition. The exposition is like our introduction. It introduces the characters, the setting, and the other thing that the exposition does is it introduces the problem. Something will always happen in the exposition, in the beginning of the story, that gets everything else started. Raise your hand if you've ever either read the Harry Potter books or you've seen the Harry Potter movies. Okay. Some of us have, not everyone. The very beginning of the Harry Potter movies and the very beginning of the Harry Potter books start off pretty much the same way. We see Harry Potter, and both of them start off where the evil wizard, where Voldemort, goes and he attacks Harry Potter's parents. Because of that, that's when he has to go live with his aunt and uncle, and that's how the rest of the story gets started. That's why he doesn't know anything about magic or anything, because he didn't grow up with his parents. That's why everything is so new and so different to him. If we look at the beginning of 4th grade Rats, we see Suds. We know that they're at school. And we see that the problem is right from the beginning. His friend is telling him, man, you gotta grow up. You gotta stop being such a baby. We're in 4th grade now. You gotta act grown up. So the exposition does those three things. It introduces the characters, it introduces the setting, it introduces the problem. Oh, there we go. Then you move on to the rising action. And what is the rising action's job? Okay, rising action is where we have complications. We use the plural of that, complications. There's more than one. Complications that move the story forward. Again, if there was a story with no complications, it'd be a very boring story. Nobody would want to read it or watch that movie. It'd be over like that, and it wouldn't be very exciting. Again, that would be like Voldemort showing up at the beginning of the Harry Potter books and going, I give up. That's it. It's over. Or that'd be like in the Avengers movie if Thanos just shows up to Captain America and he goes, hey, you know what? I give up. I'm done. Put me in jail. Nobody would want to see that movie. It'd be a very boring movie. Okay? Don't forget, I'm going to put this in all capital letters. Most of the story happens here. Most of your story is the rising action. The exposition is very quick. Most of the story is the rising action. In fact, most of these parts of the plot are very quick. This is the biggest part of the plot by far, because there has to be so many things that make the story move forward. After the exposition and after the rising action, then you come to the climax. Climax, the easiest way to explain it is the most exciting part of the story. Sometimes people call it the turning point, so I'm going to put that in there as well. The turning point. That's where everything starts to change. So right now that we're reading Coraline, we're still in the rising action of the story. There's still problems that keep happening. So we saw before, some of the problems was that Coraline was bored. She wanted something to do. She went through the doorway, through the hallway. She met the other mother. She went back to her house, and now her parents are gone. So all of these are little problems that keep on moving the story forward. We're not even at the climax yet. We still have a little bit to go till we get there. After the climax, you have the falling action. Falling action is where, after the climax, you get to the part of the story where they're able to start fixing some of those problems, the complications that happened during the rising action. In the falling action, now they're able to fix some of those problems. Put part of the story where problems are able to be fixed. So it doesn't mean they're fixed yet, but now you're able to. Something happened in the climax, and now you're able to actually start to fix these problems, whatever it was. That brings us to the resolution. There's usually another word people might use for resolution, and that word is conclusion. We can put the conclusion of the story where the characters fix the problems. Like I said, we're not going to put any we're not going to use any story on this today. But I wanted to make sure we labeled all of these parts because we are going to be using stories this week to talk about their plot. So I kind of wanted to have this one already filled out that we could keep. And that way when we fill one out for real later on this week, we could look back and kind of remind ourselves that's what this part of the story is. Or that's what this part of the story is.